This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
Bad cops, good cops, and even worse cops again. Join us as Chris and I continue to honor the life and work of Ray Liotta. Ray Liotta is one of both Chris and my favorite actors of all time. And last time around, we discussed Chris's favorite Ray Liotta movie, Narc. This time around, we're going to talk about not only my favorite Ray Liotta movie, but definitely one of my top three, maybe top one, absolute favorite movies of all time, the 1997 police drama Copland. So I think maybe I'll lay out the case a little bit of why I loved this movie. And it's an incredibly complex movie. There's so much background that's woven into the movie. And you really, when you sit there, you're in the times of the mid-90s, the problems and the lifestyle of cops, New York City, the politics of the city. So much of the interactions of the characters are built in this complex web of exposition that the movie kind of doesn't completely lay out there, and which that's one of the maybe the problems with the movie, or the reason why the movie never caught on quite as much. And for me, Copland is like a really fine wine or whiskey. Every time I watch the movie, it just continues to develop and build and open up. And I've watched this movie maybe 50 times, and I like it more and more every single time. Now, Chris, you said that maybe you had watched the movie before, but you never really thought much about it. What did you think about it, looking at it with a more critical eye?
I remember when this movie first came out, because it was like advertised as like Sly plays a very different role. He's back to serious acting, and it has an all-star cast. Harvey Keitel's in it, Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro. It was I just remember just a lot of advertisements for it, and I vaguely remember watching it and enjoying it, but I had totally forgot about this movie until you had brought it up a couple of times about wanting to do this movie. And then Ray Liotta passed away recently, and we figured this would probably be the best time to do it because Ray Liotta has a pretty big role in this movie. And I gotta say, I love this movie. It's great. It has a little bit of everything. There's some good action in it, some great acting. Stallone gives a very great performance. That's the thing too. I always think like Stallone as an actor, he gets undersold or is underrated, because when Stallone is in a serious movie and he's taking the role very seriously, you can see that he has some serious acting chops. And Ray Liotta's role as the dirty cop, not so dirty cop, was just perfect for him. And even De Niro plays a slightly different role in this movie, where he's not playing like a bad guy. He's playing internal affairs officer, and I thought he did his role quite well. And Harvey Keitel, he plays the perfect bad cop. I watched Bad Lieutenant that he starred in, the one that he starred in, and he was just amazing in that role. I know you didn't like the Nicolas Cage one, as the people who've listened to this show know.
This movie, well, I thought maybe talking about Stallone first, because like you were saying, this was a departure for Stallone. Stallone he had not quite hit the skids in his career by the mid 90s, but he had definitely maybe overplayed certain roles, action roles. And he had been in a couple of kind of really cheesy comedies. And this movie was a complete departure it's a serious drama and it's not an action movie really by any stretch of the imagination. And he put on, I think they said about 100 pounds. He had a big gut. He wasn't wearing a fat suit or anything. He earned that big gut. They kind of made him look drab. He played a nerd. It was really way outside of what Sly typically does as an actor. And I think he pulled it off masterfully. And I honestly think that should have started off a whole new phase in his career, which it really didn't.
Yeah, Stallone's weird because he'll have, from my understanding, his performance was really well received by critics, and then it was I wouldn't say it was a smashing box office success, but it did pretty good. And Stallone does this where he'll have like a really good movie, and then he's like, okay, this buys me a little bit of time, and he just starts doing bad movies again. Like I remember when Balboa came out, and I know you didn't really think much of that movie, but I remember at the time, and for me personally, it was really well received, especially his performance. And it was like, oh, this is a return to Stallone. And then he did the Rambo one, which was really well done, and then it was just right back to doing, B action movies. I don't know why Stallone does it, but I don't know. I guess it's a paycheck. But it still doesn't change the fact that he's underrated as an actor. Even some of the bad movies that he, quote unquote, bad movies that he does. I suggest anybody to watch Get Carter, where he plays this hitman, I guess, who does like various work for different mob people. And it's a fun kind of revenge movie, B/movie. He gives a really great performance in that. He plays it, he comes across as 100% believable.
Get Carter, I think that one, I mean, not to go too far into Stallone's filmography, because that could be its own show all by itself. Some of those things failed because they weren't even really necessarily his fault either. Like Get Carter, that came out I think it was a little before the one with, it was based on the same character with Mel Gibson, and Mel Gibson just killed it. And it was also a remake of a Michael Caine movie, which Michael Caine killed it. And Stallone is a great actor, but he's not quite in their caliber. I think to change the focus back to Ray Liotta, this was a movie and a character. Gary Figgis is his name, that I think only Ray Liotta could have really pulled off. He is a corrupt cop, as corrupt as they get, and he knows it. He doesn't think that he's a good cop. He knows what he's doing is wrong. It's just that's what he does. He even has a line. He says, who couldn't get by without gravy? Meaning, which one of his fellow cops couldn't live the lifestyle they're living without being corrupt and on bribery? He's honest about it, where maybe even his fellow corrupt cops in the movie aren't honest about it. He, despite being a dirty cop, though, Figsy lives by a moral code, and it does eat him up that he doesn't live up to his code, in my opinion. And but Figsy lives in the world, and he does accept it to a certain degree. But during the whole movie, it keeps eroding him from the inside. You can just tell that, and we learn all of this about Figsy just through his acting and their dialogue. They set up very little of the movie. There's maybe a 1-minute monologue in the beginning of the movie that sets up about these corrupt cops, and there's a little bit of narration throughout the movie by Mo Tilden and Robert De Niro's character. But that's about it. Really, everything else you learn about the movie is through the characters' dialogue. And then I think, in a way, I don't think this is too far to say. Maybe people will argue. Maybe people will laugh out loud at this. I'm sure you'll get your feedback on social media. I think this movie's Shakespearean.
Yeah, it is. And I would say, I mean, people will laugh at that. Yeah. But I mean, Shakespeare had done, to me, Copland is a morality play, which is, stuff that Shakespeare had done and a lot of famous playwrights. And the reason they do it is because it works. It's a morality play that is set as realistically as possible. And I think I described it to you. It definitely does have a very play kind of feel to it, where I could see this being, acted out live personally, and it would work. It almost seems maybe it was a play at one point that was converted to a movie. I'm not sure. I didn't read about that. But in terms of Ray Liotta's performance, yeah, you're totally right. And nothing's ever really explicitly said what happened to Figsy, but you get little hints of it, like through his acting. And from what I gathered, he probably went into the police force with all the good intentions. I'm going to get the bad guys. I'm going to clean up the streets. And then over time, he started realizing, well, really can't make that much of a difference. And probably slowly over time started with little corrupt things like, maybe he driving after having a couple of drinks, and then he bumps into a character like Ray who's like totally in the deep end of corruption, and then but he never really totally loses that moral side of him that you pointed out, and it bothers him to no end. Yeah, there was like a line in The Postman about the people that are most ashamed are the ones that fall just a little bit. And I mean, physically falls more than just a little bit, but I don't think he ever lost that moral compass. He's just disillusioned with the world and the way the policing works. And it slowly has eaten him up inside. But unlike Ray, where Ray totally fully embraces being corrupt, I think Figsy is still somewhat ashamed of the fact that he let himself become corrupt.
Let's pause on the characters for just a second and maybe do a little scene setting, because we got to put ourselves back into mid-90s New York City. And New York City cops, they're their own thing, and they always really have been their own thing. They even make the distinction in the movie. Sylvester Stallone's character is a small-time sheriff in New Jersey, and they're all New York City PD officers. They're cops. He's not a cop. And so they're making this distinction that they are real cops. And New York City is not an easy place to live really at any time, especially in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. It was and it is a very expensive place for someone to live on a public servant's salary. Crime was high, and police knew that as more than anybody, that crime was really bad. And I mean, really throughout American history, or at least in the post-World War II, the middle-class blue-collar dream, like for workers like cops, was to want to live in the suburbs, to have a single-family house, a backyard, good schools, a safe neighborhood, go walk to the county fair and all of that stuff. And that dream is difficult to and impossible in big cities, and even more so in New York City. People fled to the suburbs in large part for that dream of home ownership. And so then a little more of the exposition is set up by Mo Tilden, Robert De Niro. He says that Ray Donlin, that's Harvey Keitel's character, is a lieutenant in New York PD's 37th precinct, and Ray arranges for NYPD officers under his command to become part-time auxiliary transit authority cops, which that exempted them from the requirement to live in New York City. I don't know if 100% if New York City cops have to still, if they have a residency requirement today. I think they do, and a lot of places throughout the country have these residency requirements that a cop or a fireman or a lot of city workers have to live in the city limits. And so Ray gets this set up through his mob connections that these cops can, because they're part-time transit authority cops, which the transit authority is New York and New Jersey, they can live in New Jersey now. This leads to one minor point that I could quibble with. I think Ray would probably have been a captain to be the leader of an entire precinct. But I mean, they really set him out that he's the lord of the manor of this precinct. Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Scott Rank's History Unplugged podcast and other great podcasts. Go to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more. And here is a quick word from our sponsors.
Yeah. And I don't know. Does he really necessarily have to be captain if the captain knows he has all these connections to the mob and other people? It seems, does that make sense?
Yeah, I would think about that. If there was somebody above Ray that was in command, I think, to me, I had the real feeling that Ray was the lord of that fiefdom of the 37th precinct and that there was nobody in that precinct above him, that was completely his operation. I mean, it's a minor point, I think. And it's also a minor point that, as far as I know, the Port Authority is just New York and New Jersey. But I mean, again, we're not going to nitpick this stuff. But so Ray uses these mafia connections to get all of his copper cronies, buddies in his precinct cheap loans so that they can buy these houses in New Jersey. And then the mafia gets to own an entire police precinct. So it's really a win-win. And I like this a lot because in a way it's 100% believable. And it's exactly something that the mob would try to do. What did you think about that?
Yeah, 100%. Like you pointed out, this would be an investment for the mob. It makes sense for them. They'll have a whole precinct that's just going to turn a blind eye to their like loan sharking and gambling and everything else. And they'll have cops that are completely dependent on them in the sense that, you know, the reason you got low interest rates on your home and you have the ability to live outside the city and raise your family in a nice neighborhood. I mean, they're both benefiting from this situation. And I mean, it's not that far off reality. Like the mob has done not deals like this where I remember initially asking you, is like, is there a place actually called like Copland or something? Like, because it does seem 100% believable. But I mean, the mob does deals like this with cops all the time. That's why you have people like Robert De Niro's character. He's supposed to be keeping an eye on all this because the temptation is too much to not have somebody overseeing it.
I thought this was really believable in a way too, because it's really mostly Ray and a couple of people around him who are super corrupt. And then there's like another layer around him that they're corrupt cops, but they're really just going along with it. But then there's an even outer circle of cops who are just happy to get the cheap loans and not have to live in the city. And they're not going to ask too many questions. And Ray doesn't have to actually have them do anything super corrupt. He just needs to know, well, you know, fudge this report. And they're not going to ask any questions. I worked in a big city department, not a police department, but in a big city. And that had a residency requirement that you had to live there. And I would say 90% of the people who work there were looking for some way around to get out of the residency requirement. And I think that if you offered cops who are kind of, you know, in this situation, oh, here's some free loans, they'll bend the rules. I mean, I think that we're getting into a new world now in the post George Floyd world and that sort of thing, where it's getting more and more difficult for police to like out and out break the rules, like you said, like driving drunk. But that stuff was starting to end in this era. And we see in this movie how fragile it was for the police, that they weren't getting away with the stuff that they used to get away with.
Yeah, when you pointed out, like, even the people just living in the town, like the wives and the children and the brothers or what have you, that are living in this town, you pointed out like the outer circle, their job is to just not say anything, like don't tell the truth and just keep quiet. Like Liz is an example. Her husband's part of this. Liz is one of the females living in the town. Her husband is part of like the middle circle, I guess. He's part of the inner circle, but her job is to just not ask any questions and be like, well, you know, Ray understands how this stuff works. And that's, to me, I thought I really liked about this movie is they captured that perfectly. Where in a lot of movies, you would just focus on like the inner circle and it would present it like the whole town is super corrupt, when in reality, it's like layers of an onion, where it's like you have like the core and you peel it away and you peel it away. And by the time you're on the outside, it's just people just not saying anything. And that's really what keeps it all together, is people just don't talk about it.
Yeah. And I going back to my point where Ray doesn't have to have like, if you go back to that first scene, or one of the very earliest scenes where Superboy Murray Babbage, played by Michael Rappaport, he shoots the two teenagers who he thinks pull a gun on him, and he blasts out their car. And when Ray and all of his cronies come, there's no gun to be found. So they plant a gun. That'll lead into other parts of the story. But getting to my point, there was a cop there that they show being interviewed by Mo Tilden in Internal Affairs. He was, I don't remember the actor's name. He played Deacon in King of Queens, if anybody remembers that. He just pretends, he keeps his mouth completely shut. And you can tell he's conflicted by it. He probably wants to tell IA something, but he knows he'll get in trouble with Ray. And even under the best of circumstances, workers will often have to, am I going to open my trap with management against the union? Yeah. And so that even, it just adds a little bit of a layer, because let's say that Deacon from King of Queens really knew nothing about what Ray did, just that Ray got him on the transit authority so that he could live in Copland in New Jersey, in Garrison, New Jersey. He's going to have a certain amount of loyalty to Ray. And that's what Ray really built around himself, was absolute loyalty. And that was the hardest thing for IA to crack on him, was the loyalty.
Because they were all not dependent, but Ray had done them all favors. And I mean, are you really going to turn your back on the guy that helped you get a house? I mean, it's gonna have to take a lot for somebody to turn their back on that individual, right? And I guess this is what the movie explores. It's where is the whole inner circle and the whole plan is slowly kind of unraveling. And we find it initially starts unraveling. We find out later that Figsy had a partner named Tunney who was killed in his jail cell, assuming that he was going to talk about, I guess, something that Ray had gotten involved in. And this is another thing that the movie kind of does brilliantly, because we don't know for sure what that thing was. It's just kind of hinted at. And nobody says explicitly that Ray ordered the hit, but it's implied, and everybody kind of talks around it because no one's going to say it openly. Figsy's is the only person that comes close to openly saying what had happened to his partner. And that's like the first step. And then what happens with Murray, Superboy, Super Cop, going missing and jumping off the bridge, and everybody kind of knows, well, he's not missing. Ray knows where he is. He didn't jump off that bridge. And they come to the conclusion too that we're going to have to off Superboy. So within the span of a couple of years, they're having to kill two cops, at least attempt to kill Murray, to keep this whole thing going. It's slowly starting to unravel. And it's implied in the movie that Figsy was Ray's right-hand man. And Figsy, he has a lot of problems in this movie, but you could tell that he's a very smart guy. He was a very good cop. He's very intelligent. He's quick-witted. He can think quickly how to deal with situations. And he's been replaced by this guy named Jackie, who you can tell is just, he's not very bright. He's kind of a dullard. And the quality of people that Ray is surrounding himself with is starting to deteriorate too.
Yeah, Tunney, it isn't said explicitly what he did, but I got the gist that it was some sort of inappropriate behavior. Maybe he shot somebody in the line of duty, like a bad shoot, like with Murray, or there was something that it wasn't directly tied with Ray, but Ray was terrified of the prosecutors flipping Tunney, and that's why Ray had to get him off in prison. It's never explicitly said, and I never really thought of it, that Ray was going to eventually off Murray. Do you think that was his plan right from the get-go, when that Ray was going to eventually have to kill Murray, or did Ray really think that he'd be able to save Murray?
I think Ray thought there might have been a possibility, because you can, at the party where they're going to, Murray's supposed to go away or what have you, he's on the phone with, we're not exactly sure who, could be a mob guy, it could be somebody else. It
was either Frank Vincent, who played a high-ranking, the high-ranking person in the police union, or it was Leo Kransky, who was played by the great John Spencer. It was either one of them, and they were both high-ranking union guys who were also in the fix.
Okay, so I guess I missed that part. He's talking on the phone, and they're basically telling him, it's like, we got the case shut down, but they're going to open it again unless they find a body. And they're telling Ray, you gotta give us a body. And Ray's on the phone, it's my nephew, or it's my nephew-in-law, or they're related. And it sounds like he doesn't want to do it. Like he was trying to come up with some plan where he didn't have to do it, but now he's left with really no option. He has to kill him. And I mean, it's not like Ray's a good guy. He's like, oh, I don't want to kill the guy. I mean, for most sane people, even the most corrupt, that would be the last option you would think of. But, Ray's willing to do it. And later in the scene, they try to.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors. Yeah, that's the thing with Ray, I'm sure Ray didn't want to kill Tunney, but it was a necessity, and Ray was willing to do the necessity. He really didn't want to kill Murray. He liked Murray, but when it came down to it, and I wonder if that was that was Ray's downfall, really, is that I would have liked to have seen that maybe explored more as if Ray had survived all of this. I mean, big time spoiler alert, he gets killed. But let's say that none of the stuff with Sylvester Stallone, Freddy happens. Is Ray killing Murray? Is that maybe the breaking point for him, that he just starts to really get sloppy after that, and that's when the whole thing falls apart?
That would have been interesting to see, actually. I mean, Ray reminds me of like a good mob boss in a lot of ways, where, I mean, the reason he killed Tunney is because, I don't know, maybe Tunney might have said something, or he was going to say something. And I mean, if you look at a lot of mob bosses, this is why a lot of mob bosses were against their guys like dealing drugs, because the federal sentencing were so long that if you got caught and you're facing 30 years, a lot of these mob guys would try to kill them. I mean, Goodfellas explores this movie. Me and you have been in this mafia binge recently, so I've been reading a lot about it. But it would make sense, because if you're worried that Tunney's going to talk and Tunney talks, that's it. The whole thing falls down. So you're kind of left with no choice. It's like the same thing with the mob guy. He's facing 35 years. There's a good chance that he's not going to want to spend 35 years in jail. So he's going to talk probably. We got to take care of him. And with Murray, and I'm sure this is how a lot of these like mafia bosses and these people who run these criminal organizations, it starts off as something they don't really want to do. And then they do it enough times and it starts eating away at them if they're a normal human being, or they go power crazy thinking, well, look at how many people I've killed and nothing's happened. And they just start doing it more and more and more and more, and they get out of hand. Ray probably would have been a little bit of both. It would start eating away at him, because I don't think Ray's like, he's not like an evil person per se. Like, I don't think he's a psychopath, but you do something enough times, it just becomes a habit, right?
Yeah, I think that is the story with Ray, is that I think that it would eventually have just kept eating away at him. But let's move on to Freddy, because Freddy is really the core of the movie. And I think we'll be able to set Freddy up against a lot of the characters in this movie. So Freddy was a kid who grew up in this cop town in Garrison, New Jersey, which Garrison, New Jersey is not a real place, a real city. But if you have ever gone between New York City and New Jersey, there's a lot of places that kind of look like Garrison, that look like a small town, really, in comparison to the big city. And you can see the full Manhattan skyline from these cities, or from these towns in New Jersey that are small towns, maybe not as small as Garrison, but kind of that drift. But so Freddy, when he was a teenager, it looks like maybe an older teenager, he lost part of his hearing when a young girl's car went over a bridge. Freddy's just eating his lunch. He saves this girl's life by diving into the water, but he loses his ear. And so that means that because he had lost his hearing in that one ear, he couldn't become an NYPD cop. So Ray gives him kind of the booby prize of being the sheriff of this small town in New Jersey. And this is really, to me, it drives to the point that this is a character driven movie. And it's amazing how much they were able to develop so many characters, and not only so many characters, but so many relationships in such a short movie. It's a 2-hour movie, maybe 2 hour and a little bit. Freddie, really, he's an idealist and he hasn't been corrupted by the city. What would you say, though? Because you're saying that Freddie is not corrupted by the city, but is he kind of corrupted in a way, though?
I mean, I would say, because one of the first times we see Freddie's hammered at the police bar and he just decides that he's going to, drive his car and he crashes it into a tree. He's taking quarters out of the parking lot. I mean, these are small little things. Right?
Yeah, he takes it out of the parking meter. So he uses his cop key.
And these are just like little things, but you could tell that he's kind of disillusioned with at least his part in life and policing in this town in general, right? And I think part of it is because he knows it's all somewhat built on a lie, and he's not exactly sure the extent of the lie, but he knows something, and it's kind of slowly eating away at him. And he's very different than the kid that dived into the water without a second's hesitation to save Liz.
I would definitely say that he's jaded by the world. He knows what it's all about, but he doesn't really have maybe the moral character to say anything against it. He gets to play law enforcement and he likes it, and it's not a hard job. He gets to carry a big gun. He gets to help out Ray and the other cops. He gets to hang out in the cop bar. But really, all he's really doing in the town is yelling at kids and pulling over people who speed through the town. And even a lot of the people who speed through the town are cops, and they just let them go. So he's somebody who's not necessarily corrupted, in my opinion, but he's jaded.
Yeah, and I would say Freddie wants to join with the NYPD because he wants to do it for all the right reasons. He's not doing it so he can, skim off the top or, catch a break or what have you. If Freddie wants to join the NYPD because he wants to relive that moment of when he dived into the water and saved that girl. He truly wants to be the hero. And I think one of the reasons that he's jaded and he seems kind of, depressed and frumpy, I guess is the word I would use for it. Like he's just kind of out of it, is he knows that there's something wrong with the town, but he doesn't really have that in him anymore to fix the problem until obviously later in the movie. And it's eating away at him, because he mentions even later in the movie that if he had to jump in that water again to save that girl, he's not exactly sure whether he'd do it or not. And he admits that was the greatest thing I'd ever done in my life. So he's dying to be the hero. He just doesn't know how to be the hero in the situation that he is in right now.
So as usual, I definitely suggest that people go and watch this movie. Watch it. Go rent it and watch it as many times as you can in the 48 hours. And I don't think we won't go into all of the twists and turns of the movie, but there are some twists in the movie. And I think in the end, really, without saying the whole ending, because, that could take a while. Basically, in the end, Freddie kills Ray, kills a couple of the other cops. And we don't really know how it ends up. We know that there's investigations, and they just give us that with a montage of newsreels at the end of the movie, but we don't really know exactly how it ends. We know that we know that Freddie goes and tells internal affairs back in the city, but people should go out and definitely watch it. But I would say the thing that I liked about it is that in a movie that was pretty complicated, had a pretty complicated plot, had a lot of characters, it really didn't have any serious plot holes. And you had a couple of minor points, but I think in general, you can say that for a movie that was pretty complicated, a lot of characters. It tied up everything really nicely.
And it was easy to follow too, right? It wasn't like you're struggling to understand the conspiracy and how everything was, how did everything fit together? It was relatively easy to follow, and it gave us the opportunity to focus on the characters, right? I mean, I have I don't know, I guess the way Figsy shows up at the last minute to save Freddy was just a little too. I would have liked something where, I don't know, he goes to a police station and he realizes Freddy's not there, and he's like, "Oh, where is he? Oh, he must be at Ray's house." That just something like that would have been. I would have liked that. He just kind of shows up and just knows exactly that he's right at Ray's house in the middle of a shootout, deaf, trying to save Murray. It's just, I don't know, it was a little too Hollywood-esque for me in a movie that's really grounded in reality.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that was maybe, they would have had to have done a little bit too much setup for Figsy to have all put it together. And I think they spent as much time really where Figsy has that emotional breakdown where he's driving out of the city knowing that he's leaving Freddy to take on the whole corrupt organization. And Figsy's really his last scene to me of any importance was when he looks at himself in the car mirror, and just that where he says, "Stop looking at me," to himself. They probably could have, I think they had to show him in the final shootout, but I liked it in the final shootout where all the cops are shooting at each other and they all keep missing. It's not like a Sylvester Stallone where he hits every single person. He's shooting and misses a bunch of times. The other cops shoot and miss. And, it had, I think, like you were saying, and I never really even thought of this, is that it's hyper realistic in a lot of ways mixed with the play, and it does it really well. I think that thinking about it in that way, that it's as a play, makes it even better to me.
Yeah, it's a traditional morality play or the hero's journey where Freddy plays the character where he's looking for the heroic moment where he can stand and relive that moment that he had when he saved that girl. And it's his journey to get to that point. And yeah, it's his journey to get to that point. But it's all grounded very much in reality. It's very easy to kind of take that template and go a little too far in the fantasy realm, where for this movie to work personally, it had to stay within the confines of kind of hyper realism, where you feel like, yeah, this is something that easily could happen in real life. And maybe it didn't happen exactly the way it's laid out in this movie, but maybe it could happen down the road.
Let's talk about some of these characters, because I think in the whole movie, they set up a lot of dichotomies and pairings of character traits of the different characters. Ones that come to mind are Freddie and Superboy and Figsy, Freddie and Figsy. These character pairings that they draw us to, they show how the characters are similar in ways and then completely different. So like Freddie and Superboy, they set that one up right off the bat where they both crash their cars right in the beginning and both are drunk. One crash leads to a minor accident, while the other one, Murray's, leads to the death of two men and his ruined reputation. In a lot of ways, because Murray had such a big reputation, he had so much further to fall. Freddie had no reputation. And so everybody just kind of laughed it off. They knew he was drunk and probably crashed up his car, and it's no big deal. One of the undersheriff's deputies of Freddie, he just thinks the whole thing's funny. Oh, there you go again. Now, I was making this comparison, and I would wonder what you thought. Do you think that Freddie and Superboy were supposed to be approximately the same age?
I don't know. I would assume Freddie's probably a little bit older, but they would probably not be that far off. Maybe 8 years apart, give or take. Not like crazy age difference.
I think, well, in reality, Sylvester Stallone's got to be way older than Michael Rappaport. But I was kind of thinking that they were trying to show that they were sort of parallels in that way. Murray is the hotshot young cop, but he's not really young. He's not a rookie or anything because he's been in the trenches. They say Freddie's been a cop for 10 years. So yeah, maybe Murray's got 5 years on the job and Freddie's got 10. I could see that. I would have liked it if, and I mean, I think that was probably the problem, is that Sylvester Stallone had to have been in his upper 40s or 50s at that point. And they're portraying him as somebody younger, though. I think clearly Freddie's supposed to be maybe in his 30s.
Yeah.
He's not supposed to be a 40s, 50s. Maybe he was supposed to be in his 40s or 30s or later 30s, early 40s, and had maybe screwed around. And then Ray finally gets him a job on the force. I think a lot of that really depended, to me, is how long had this cop land in New Jersey been set up for? Was this a thing that was 20, 30 years long going on? I mean, I don't know. I think that was something that they left kind of vague, but I would have liked to have known a little bit more about.
Yeah. Well, in the contrast, I just thought of this right now, whereas they both drive home drunk and they both crash their cars not too far away from each other in reality. And Murray is the Superboy and he's on top of the bridge, and Freddie is at the bottom of the bridge, and everyone's super concerned about Superboy, where, like, oh my God, I can't believe you did this. Don't worry, we're going to cover this up. And Freddie is just embarrassed and everyone thinks it's funny. And you could tell that Freddie's like deeply embarrassed that he's a cop that drinks home, that gets drunk and drives home. He's deeply embarrassed by this. This is not like behavior that cops should be doing.
And it's not the behavior that Freddie thinks of himself. I mean, that's kind of and it's a realistic portrayal. There's a lot of, everybody in a way doesn't live up to who they think they really should be or who they really are. Freddie wouldn't put on his resume that he goes and drinks at the cop bar all night and then drives home drunk. That's not how he views himself. And that's not how he views his best self. But that doesn't stop him from going and getting drunk every night at the bar. Yeah,
well, that's the thing, is I think that's one of the reasons why Freddie is depressed, because he does hold himself to a higher standard, but he's in this trap where he doesn't know how to get out of it, and the Murray case gives him a way to get out of it, to get out of this cycle.
Then you have Ray Domlin and Mo Tilden. They set up a lot of comparisons and contrasts with them, in that both of them graduated from the police academy together. You kind of get the drift that they served together and maybe they didn't really particularly like each other. But then Mo Tilden goes into being internal affairs and Ray goes to become a corrupt street cop. In a lot of ways, the cops don't like internal affairs because they feel like they're just going to get cops and their desk jobs. And in a way, Ray is more doing real policing because he's out on the streets. But Mo Tilden's job is to make sure people like Ray don't go off the reservation and they're doing what they're supposed to do. Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors.
Yeah, and then Mo also mentions that Ray was a good cop at one point and something changed, and he's not exactly sure what happened. Probably just got fed up with the job and figured, like, there's no way of me getting ahead in this. Doing it the right way. I might as well just start doing it the corrupt way. Yeah, I don't blame cops for kind of feeling like internal affairs, that's their job, is to just watch cops and catch guys who make minor mistakes. I mean, I get it. You're basically institutionalizing rats to a degree. And Ray mentions this to Freddie, and it makes a lot of sense. How they recruit in internal affairs, they catch you doing something, and they're like, well, you know what these guys are doing because you were one of them. Either you're gonna lose your job or you help us do this. And I'm sure that probably goes on. I'm not a cop, so I don't know for sure, but it would make sense to me. It's who I would hire to do the job.
Then we have Ray and Freddie. Freddie was always kind of, I think, in a way that, and the way Ray treats Freddie, I bet you that when Freddie was young, he's been attached to Ray since he was a kid, I think. And that Freddie is almost like a son to Ray. I mean, that's really how Ray treats Freddie. I mean, he treats him kind of like a servant too, but I think I get kind of like a father-son relationship vibe kind of between Ray and Freddie, more than just a business relationship.
Yeah, you could tell that Ray really does care about Freddie, but he talks to him like he's a child. He talks down to him. You could tell that you can tell that Ray doesn't really think much of Freddie's intelligence and capabilities. And you could tell that it bothers Freddie that Ray thinks of him this way. And the way Ray talks to him, he's just so dismissive of him, where even I'm watching the movie and I'm like, I kind of want to smack Ray in the face. Like, you can't talk to people like this, man. It's going to bite you in the butt. And it does later in the movie.
Don't you think Ray kind of, I've seen relationships like this where Freddie, going back to if this really is the case that Freddie and Ray have been together, that, maybe Ray was a young cop and settling in New Jersey, and Freddie was the type of kid who would always come around, and want to hang around with the older guys. And I think that Ray never grew out of that relationship of seeing Freddie as a kid, and he's treating him like a kid. And I think to your point where you see that it's so disrespectful, it's because Ray is treating a grown man like a kid.
Yeah. And I get it. Like, you grew up with somebody and you looked after them kind of like a father, best friend type situation. But I mean, Freddie's a full grown man. Talk to him like a man. Don't talk to him like a child. This is a guy that, was willing to risk his life to save somebody. He deserves respect.
Freddie says one of my favorite lines in any movie. I think it's a line that I probably think of, if not daily, all the time when certain situations come up. Big Z says to Freddie, being right isn't a bulletproof vest. And that blew my mind. What is this movie's 30 years old going on? Being right is not a bulletproof vest. Big Z's telling Freddie when Freddie finally turns and he's going to take on Ray, Freddie thinks he's the action hero and that he's going to go to IA and blow all this up. But there's going to be consequences. And you just see so many times in your life at work or with somebody in your family or with a friend, you're right. But being right doesn't mean that everything's going to work out perfectly. And in the end, a lot of times you might be right and you still get screwed in the end.
Yeah, this is something I still struggle with in my life, where I'll see people doing stuff or at work or in my personal life. And I'm like, well, I told you not to do it like that. And you're right. And you keep on telling the person, yet they don't listen, or you're right. And yet you see something going in a certain direction and there's really nothing you can do to stop it. I still struggle. Maybe as I get older, I'll struggle with it less, but I still struggle with that, where I'm right. I'm telling the truth. I'm telling you what to do. And if you did it this way, everything would turn out great. And yet that's not always the case. Either people don't listen or they don't want to listen. And there could be all different types of reasons for it. But yeah, it's something that I struggle with, where I'm like, I'm telling you. I'll use an example, something with news. I'm pretty good at predicting where something is going in the news. And I'll tell people people are going to start talking about, it could be anything in 3 months, guaranteed 100%. Just give it some time. 3 months will come by and they'll be like, oh, you were right about that. And then you tell them something else and then they'll argue with you. And I'm just like, I'm not lying to you. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm right 100% of the time, but I'm telling you, this is the direction it's going in. And yet, a lot of the times people don't want to listen.
Or a lot of situations like at work where you see your boss doing something wrong and it's wrong and it's wrong and you feel self-righteous about it. And you're going to go to his boss and tell how your boss is doing everything wrong or this, and this wrong. And then you wind up getting in trouble for it because you're the squeaky wheel And I think that Bigsy's getting to that point, the anti-Manichaean point of good versus evil. Bigsy has a moral compass. He knows what's wrong, but he's not willing, or he was never willing to go against what was wrong because he had a girlfriend, he had a nice house, the stuff that he was doing wrong and the stuff that he knew Ray was doing wrong, even down to killing Tunny, Bigsy's best friend and partner. He was willing to live with all of that. So maybe in a lot of ways, being right isn't a bulletproof vest is a good way to live life, but it can also be a really rotten way to live life. Like, it shows that you have a moral compass, but you're not willing to fight for what you know is right. But then there's also the point, the layer to that statement that, not the world is not right, and you have to make certain compromises. And getting to your point, as you get older, you start to make more of those compromises.
Yeah, well, and I mean, in Figsy, when he says that, it's not a bulletproof vest, and Freddie immediately says, well, I'm going to bring this whole town to heel, or he said it before, everyone's going to tell the truth. And Figsy tells him, well, you got to get Murray first. And Figsy and Freddie says, well, I'm going to get him. And you could see Figsy's eyes light up a moment where, well, if he does get him, like, we could actually bring this whole thing down. Where I think Figsy just didn't see a way, or was turning a blind eye to a way to actually do the right thing. He probably did legitimately not see a way, as you said, like, I know the truth, but it's not going to provide me cover. I got to find a way to go at this diagonally, as he describes it to Freddie, and he just didn't know a way to do that. But there is an opportunity here for him and for Freddie. If they find Maury, then they can blow the whole thing up, because Ray and those guys were lying about him jumping off the bridge, and then they tried to kill him. And obviously, Superboy is going to spill the beans about everything that went on there, and that's finally going to bring the truth out. But Freddie's got to find him first.
Let's look at one more dichotomy today, and that's Bigsy and Ray, because that's a kind of the Bigsy Ray relationship really lines up in a lot of ways well with the Freddie and Ray relationship. Bigsy, again, was Ray's right-hand man and almost like another son figure, but Bigsy was respected by Ray. And it wasn't really till Bigsy started cracking up that Ray brings in Jackie, who's kind of like he's brought in really because he's loyal, but he's a bulldog. He's the opposite in Bigsy, in that Bigsy is loyal but smart. Jackie is loyal and dumb. Yeah. He's like an animal, basically. Even the way he's the guy that drops the gun at the crime scene. He does just the way he does it. It's like couldn't you have put it in the trunk, or you know what I mean? Like somewhere that would have been a little less obvious, other than he just shows up to the car and he's just like, oh yeah, here's the gun, guys. Like, it's just like, no one's going to believe that. Like, Figsy would have found a way to get some kind of weapon in there and make it at least look a little bit believable. To me, this is one of the more interesting relationships is between Figsy and Ray, because we can tell that Figsy's kind of slowly been going off he's going through a rough patch, and it's never explicitly stated in the movie, but I think he starts going down this road after Tunny's killed, and he knows the truth of what happened. Either Ray ordered it himself, or Ray knows who did it, and that was his partner, that was his best friend, but he doesn't really know what to do doesn't really know what to do. And if you're Ray, you would kind of lose a little bit of respect for Figsy, would you not? Like, the truth about what happened to your partner, and yet here you are still eating out of my hand. It would be difficult to trust that person. And when Freddie and Figsy are working together, everyone tells Freddie, be careful about Figsy. You can't really trust everything that he's saying. And for the most part, he's telling Freddie the truth. He might conceal a couple of things, but I mean, I would have a hard time trusting Figsy after that. Would you not? Would you not have a hard time? probably because Figsy did it. He definitely, that was his cracking up happened really quickly, how he was clearly on drugs and he's taking drugs from the police impound to give to his girlfriend and for his own personal use. The cops know that and they see that, and it bothers them because him cracking up, Figsy cracking up, is the thing that could blow up the entire town.
Yeah. And I mean, it's embarrassing to them. Like they're trying, like they're all corrupt, but you couldn't just tell by looking at Ray or Jackie or some of these other guys. It's like, oh yeah, those guys are pretty much mafia, but they're cops. Figsy, you can look at him right away. It's like, oh yeah, this guy's a coke addict. It's not a cop. You know what I mean? Like with the red rings under his nose and the bug eyes.
I have a feeling that at the end of the movie, they make it out like the whole town is blown up and the whole police department. I have a feeling that this is something that they would probably cover up. Like maybe, I mean, it would be the way Freddie blew it up by killing like 10 officers at the end, that it would be hard to clean up and to cover up. But I think that this, especially in the 90s, before we learned a lot of things of police corruption and police abuse that really started to come out like in the next decade after that, I think that would have shaken the city to its absolute core. I mean, the mayor would have gone down, half the police department would have gone down. You wouldn't know who's corrupted and who isn't corrupted. What do you think about that?
I mean, I don't know how much they would have been able to cover it up because, you know, Freddie literally brings Maury to the police precinct and then he's right there. And you have Figsy, a police officer who does testimony, you know, telling everything that he did and that Ray was doing. But I think it'd probably get like the Jeffrey Epstein treatment where, you know, they talk about it for a little bit and then just kind of try to push it aside and forget about it. That's what I think would happen. But they would have no choice but to at least talk about it a bit.
I think they would try and compartmentalize it as much as possible because, I mean, it went right to the mayor. The mayor is the one who said to stop investigating Superboy jumping off the bridge. These types of things, I think, get stage managed in a way, kind of this whole being right isn't a bulletproof vest, because can a city really afford to have all of its authority completely cut out from under it? I mean, this is the type of thing that people wouldn't trust the police and the government and the mayor and the whole apparatus ever again. I think we're kind of seeing that stuff playing out now, but that's an erosion that happened over years and years and years. This is one thing that comes out that just shows that the whole thing is a sham.
Yeah. I mean, and people say like, oh, that seems crazy that the mayor was all in on it. But I mean, I've been listening to a show recently and it's about I'm trying to remember that Buddy, I believe his name was. He was the mayor in Providence, Rhode Island. And he was quite literally just part of the mob. Like, you know what I mean? Like working with them, and this all came out. And I mean, it's not that far fetched. I know Providence is a little different than, you know, New York City, but
kind of cut of the same cloth, just smaller.
Yeah, just smaller. I mean, and there was that mayor, I believe it was it DC? The guy was caught smoking crack with a prostitute. I mean, these things happen, and you're saying like people would lose faith and complete faith in the institutions. I mean, you look at those examples, there's people who still defend that mayor from Providence, even though he's on video talking about like, you know, beating this guy up because he cheated on his wife. I'm just using it as an example, like, you know, just crazy stuff that you figure like, I can't believe a mayor is involved in this, but something of this magnitude, it would definitely shake faith in the institutions for sure. And as you pointed out, it would be something they would try to cover up, because once you lose faith in these types of institutions, and you said we're seeing it now, it's very hard to get it back. It takes decades to get it back to where it was before.
Maybe to wrap things up today, how do you think that this movie changed your thoughts on Ray Liotta? And how does it maybe compare to his performance in Narc to you?
I would say still Narc is a superior performance, but I mean, Ray's incredible. This movie, like pretty much any movie that Ray's done, he's done a bunch of stinkers too. Don't get me wrong, but his performances usually in the movies they're worth watching. Like Ray brings a certain level of intensity to his roles, and you could tell that he's giving it 110%. And he was perfect in this role. I couldn't see anybody else playing Figsy. It's just the look he has in his eyes and the intensity that he brings to the role he was just perfect for it.
Yeah, I think IMDb said that he wanted to play somebody else. Ray Liotta may have wanted to even play Freddy, and maybe he could have pulled it off. I wouldn't have said in a million years that Sylvester Stallone would be the person to pull off that role, but boy, did he. I couldn't think. Who would you think maybe could have done Sylvester Stallone's character as well or better?
I mean, you were talking about this earlier, and for the life of me, I can't really think of Stallone ever playing just a full-on bad guy. Like he's played like questionable guys where like, are they good? Are they bad? It would have been interesting to see Sly play, say, Ray's right-hand man. Just a full-on bad guy. Because we're discussing about this, and it would have been interesting to see Ray play the good guy, because he's another guy that I can't really think of too many movies where Ray's played just the full-on
Harvey Keitel. Yeah, he's always some sort of bad guy.
Yeah. Oh no, sorry. I'm sorry. I meant Ray Liotta is what I meant. Ray Liotta playing. Or Ray would have worked too, because Harvey Keitel is the same thing. He's always playing some kind of like. He's played cops before, but it's always like in this particular movie, he's played like he's a very dirty cop. He's played cops that are like, I don't know, are they kind of good or they're kind of bad? But you mentioned like Ray Liotta wanting to play Freddy. That would have been interesting to see. I don't know if it would have worked, but it would have been interesting to see Ray play just a full on Ray Liotta play just the good guy going on the hero's journey, and Sly Stallone playing the bad guy.
Ooh, what about this? Nicolas Cage as Freddy.
That would have been. I think he could have pulled it off.
I think that
he's done similar roles.
That could have been interesting to somebody like that. That would have been weird. I think that Freddy, that character, is almost screaming for somebody to test your expectations. You couldn't have somebody like completely. I'm trying to think of somebody from the 90s who would have been kind of young and goofy and kind of a loser, but who turns around into a super good guy. I think somebody conventional wouldn't have pulled it off. I think you did need somebody unconventional like Sylvester Stallone doing it, or Nicolas Cage. That I don't know if I'll be able to sleep tonight or not thinking about that.
I think he could have pulled it off. It just came to my head right now. Maybe like Brad Pitt gaining a bunch of weight and playing like a loserish, depressed, frumpy kind of cop, which is, Brad Pitt's done a lot of different roles, but it would have been interesting to kind of see him play that role.
Yeah, that would have been an interesting one because he would have been younger. He'd be probably more of John Rappaport, or not John, Michael Rappaport's age. And that could have been an interesting one. Brad Pitt as Freddy.
Yeah, because he always plays like I don't know, at that time he was like the heartthrob or what have you, and he's playing the role of where he's not the heartthrob. He's just like the sheriff of this small town. He's depressed and kind of a drunk, and I think it would have been interesting to see him play that role.
I think that's where we'll leave people today, is Brad Pitt and that type, and Brad Pitt maybe in the remake of Copland.